My granddaddy on my father's side was a milkman. He watched as, year by year, his job faded away until finally the dairy he worked for discontinued home delivery. Everybody was getting their milk from the supermarket. They didn't need a milkman anymore. He'd become obsolete. I never thought that would happen to me, but it did. My first newsletter was called Illuminations. It was the best title I could come up with at age 13. I wrote the first edition out by hand in ballpoint pen. It was 2 pages, front and back. My dad worked for the railroad, and they had a ditto machine in the yard office. I'd go in there and he'd let me run off copies, which I then sold to kids at school for 25 cents an issue. I was very entrepreneurial from a young age. And Dad, he was sympathetic to my cause. He told me about the JFK assassination when I was probably 9 or 10, how the official story didn't add up, and that got me started. The first conspiracy theory I came up with all on my own was about the JFK assassination. Well, all on my own. We're all branching off from each other, I guess. Did you ever hear the one about how the magic bullet that wounded both JFK and Connolly was being remote controlled by an agent of the Mossad with a powerful electromagnet? That was me. Didn't make much of a splash, but, it was a promising early effort. By the time I graduated high school, I'd written my first book, Highest Treason. It was about how Bill Clinton had made a pact with aliens to sell out the United States so that the aliens could colonize it and use the American people as slave labor. I got it published at a small press, and it was available on spinner racks at truck stops all along the East Coast, from Pennsylvania down to Florida. Sold pretty well. This was during the era of the X-Files, Independence Day. The extraterrestrial stuff was hot back then. I was a generalist when it came to subjects, but I did have a specialty of sorts, blaming the Jews. I know, a conspiracy theorist who says he specializes in blaming the Jews. Isn't that a little bit like a chef who says he specializes in food? But that's my point. Everybody does it, but nobody does it like me. Wildfires started by Jewish space lasers? Anybody could have come up with that. Fucking Bush League. When I was in my prime, other conspiracy theorists who blamed stuff on the Jews were doing finger painting, and I was painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel with anti-Semitism, just like Michelangelo. I prided myself on being able to blame the Jews for anything that happened. Not just the big stuff that everybody else went after either. Little stuff nobody else even tried to blame on the Jews. When Wendy's changed their fries, Jews. When movie theaters started showing commercials before the sneak previews, Jews, obviously. When Major League Baseball added a pitch clock, Jews. My favorite was, I came up with a deal where I blamed the Jews for the earth being flat. Like, the earth used to be round, but the Jews made it flat for some purpose or another. I think it had something to do with they wanted to make it look like a coin because of the Jews love money thing. It's been a while, I can't remember. That one almost got me on Coast to Coast AM. But I was bummed because Dick Morris went long. At first, I would create elaborate scenarios explaining how the Jews were responsible for whatever it was, but pretty soon I realized it wasn't necessary. Most of my audience was people who believe in conspiracy theories, and once you say the Jews did it, they don't usually ask follow-up questions. Anti-Semitism was always good for business. Bill Clinton was good for business back in the day, but 9/11? Whew, boy. Now that was the mother lode. I ate off of that for 10 years at least. After that came the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, Hurricane Katrina, and President Obama. It was a golden age for people in my line of work. Then in 2016, Trump got elected, and we all thought he was the golden goose, I didn't realize it was actually the beginning of the end. At first, it was great. The president was one of us, right? He built his whole political career on the Obama birth certificate conspiracy theory, and he only went up from there. He totally embraced all the classic Clinton stuff. He got behind QAnon and Pizzagate. He believed every line of bullshit about Joe and Hunter Biden anybody ever told him. He even blamed Ted Cruz's dad for the Kennedy assassination. It was amazing. COVID hit in 2020, and that was really good for us, mostly. I was in the hospital for 6 weeks because I refused to wear a mask in public, but sometimes you've got to make personal sacrifices to sell the gimmick, you know? I did get the vaccine as soon as it was available, but we pushed that anti-vax stuff like crazy, and Trump helped with that too. And the anti-mask stuff, even though he was president during the pandemic. Trump loses to Biden, still good, because now we can work off of the stolen election narrative, plus we get 4 years of spreading every batshit idea about Biden that we can think of. Trump gets reelected last year. I'm thinking happy days are here again. Only it turns out, for people like me, the happy days are over. Granddaddy lost his job as a milkman because of competition. Not competition from other milkmen, competition from supermarkets that made what he did no longer necessary. Since Trump took office this second time, I've come to realize that I am being made redundant just like Granddaddy was. Only my competition is real life. Let me explain it this way. Right now, the richest man in the world, who owns a company that builds rockets and who has openly talked for years about wanting to colonize Mars, who also owns another company that is developing an AI powered by massive supercomputers and data centers that are draining the electricity and using up the water from their surrounding communities, who also owns another company that is currently experimenting with implanting computer chips in people's brains, who also owns another company that controls thousands of satellites that provide internet access and do who knows what else for the United States government and other governments around the world. That guy has been appointed to a government position with almost no oversight that gives him access to the personal information of hundreds of millions of people and the power to fire any government employee or eliminate any government program that he wants. That sounds like one of my first drafts. If I'd written it, I would have scaled it back some to make it sound more plausible. That's the news. People make chit-chat at parties and they ask me what I do for a living, and I say, I'm a conspiracy theorist. And they say, oh, you must be loving this. And I get why they think that, but no, I'm not. Since I was a teenager, I've been telling people about how the elites are plotting to use the government to rob us of our liberty and subvert the Constitution and make themselves rich off of their blatantly corrupt and evil activities. And now, government agents are snatching people and deporting them to a prison in El Salvador without due process. The president nominated a suspected sex trafficker for attorney general. The Secretary of Defense is a drunk who shares classified battle plans in unsecured group chats. The president is planning a military parade for his own birthday and is publicly accepting the gift of a free luxury airplane from the royal family of a Middle Eastern country. So, what's my role exactly? When the president goes on TV and says he hasn't ruled out running for a third term even though the Constitution limits him to 2, or when the vice president visits the Pope and then the Pope dies the next fucking day. I mean, come on! How am I supposed to compete with that? The apathy from the audience is the most discouraging thing. All this stuff, exactly like the stories we conspiracy theorists have been pushing for decades, it's happening right out in the open. And nobody even cares. Even the mainstream media just mostly reports on it like it's normal. That's a very challenging creative environment for someone like me. So, I don't know what I'll do now. I thought about pivoting into online misogyny. I've kind of been on the periphery of that for a while anyway, but those guys are so uncreative. I just can't imagine being fulfilled by that, you know? An acquaintance of mine has been trying to get me into transvestigating, but he's such a gross, twisted little creep. If I turned into someone like that, I don't know if I could look myself in the mirror. There's still such a thing as self-respect. Outside the town where I live, there's a dairy farm that started to sell raw milk. That's one of the few growth industries for people like me who cater to those with, oh, let's call them alternative worldviews. The crunchy moms, God bless them, they'll swallow anything so long as it hasn't been pasteurized. Maybe I'll call that dairy farm, see if they have an opening for a delivery driver. That would be a nice way to come full circle, becoming a milkman just like my granddaddy. Of course, granddaddy's milk was safe to drink.